They called it the Book of the Dead, but that was never its name, not truly. In ancient Kemet, what we now call Egypt, it was known as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, a manual, a map, not for the afterlife as we think of it, but for something more profound, a soul's journey through dimensions, through consciousness, through the illusions of death and the remembering of eternal life. You were never meant to read it as mythology. You were meant to remember it. This wasn't a religion, it was technology, symbolic, poetic, encoded in metaphor, but as precise as any machine, because the ancients knew death was not the end. It was a passage, and the soul didn't just pass through it. It had to be prepared for it. The scrolls, the walls, the papyri, they weren't decorations. They were tools, sigils, frequencies. Every spell in the Book of the Dead was a calibration, not to appease gods, to awaken memory. You were meant to recognize the voices in the book not as instructions, but as parts of you, the confessions, the declarations, the names of gates and guardians. These were mirrors, not maps, because what the soul encounters in the underworld is not monsters, it's itself. Every shadow, every denial, every attachment, the weighing of the heart, it wasn't divine judgment, it was resonance. Your heart had to match the feather of Ma'at, truth, order, balance, not because you were punished if it didn't, but because you couldn't pass through the next gate if your frequency was too heavy. The Egyptians weren't obsessed with death. They mastered it. They studied it. They mapped its terrain so thoroughly that when it came time to leave the body, they knew exactly what came next, and they left us the manual. But somewhere along the line, we turned it into myth, into magic, into fiction. We forgot it was a mirror. If this part cracked open a memory deeper than thought, comment. I remember the passage, because death is not darkness, it's initiation. Imagine standing before a gate, not one made of stone, but of vibration. Not guarded by beasts, but by silence. In the ancient Egyptian texts, these gates were not merely entrances to other realms. They were thresholds of the self, and each one demanded a password, not of words, but of frequency. You didn't pass through because you were worthy. You passed through because your resonance aligned with the gate's truth. And so the soul spoke, spell after spell, verse after verse. It wasn't casting magic, it was tuning, attuning. One of the most misunderstood sections of the Book of the Dead is the negative confession, 42 declarations made before the 42 assessors of Ma'at. But this wasn't confession in the modern sense. It wasn't about guilt or shame, it was about alignment. I have not lied. I have not stolen. I have not caused pain. These were not just moral codes, they were frequency stabilizers, because every act, every thought, every intention leaves a residue in the field of the soul. And in the passage beyond death, nothing can be hidden. This is what the ancients knew, that death isn't a place, it's a mirror. And the more distorted your field, the more distorted what you see. So the rituals, the words, the symbols, they weren't meant to fool the gods. They were meant to remind the soul, to sharpen its signal, to prepare it to face itself without flinching. The heart was weighed against a feather, not for drama, but for physics. A heavy heart, laden with lies, attachments, regrets, could not ascend. Not because of punishment, because of density. And if the heart failed the test, it was devoured by Amit, the devourer of the untrue. But Amit was not a monster. Amit was the symbol of spiritual gravity. What cannot rise, falls. This is the core of the Book of the Dead, that the soul is not judged by an external deity, but by its own coherence. It doesn't matter what you believed, it matters what you became. If this part helped you see ancient judgment not as punishment but as resonance, comment, I weigh my heart in truth, because the underworld is not a courtroom, it's a chamber of echoes, and only the true can pass through. You've been told that the Book of the Dead is a religious text, a manual for mummies, a guide to get the soul safely through the afterlife. But what if that's just a surface layer? What if this ancient text wasn't meant to be read by the dead, but by the living? Because here's the truth most don't see. The Book of the Dead was never just about the afterlife. It was about inner transformation, about waking up in this life. The Egyptians weren't obsessed with death. They were obsessed with consciousness, with the ability to remain awake through the illusion of form. Every spell, every ritual, every judgment scene wasn't just symbolic. It was instructional, not how to die well, but how to live with awareness in a world built to make you forget. The weighing of the heart against the feather, that wasn't just a test for the dead, it was a code, a metaphor. The feather represents Ma'at, the principle of truth, order, harmony. If your heart, your inner field, is heavy with regret, illusion, or attachment, you don't pass into some faraway heaven. You get stuck, not in another realm, but in this one, repeating patterns, repeating lifetimes, repeating blindness. And the heart being eaten by Amit, that's not punishment, that's feedback. When you refuse to purify yourself, to integrate your shadows, your inner chaos consumes you, not after you die. Now, in your relationships, in your mind, in your choices. This is the sacred mirror, and the ancients gave us instructions on how to pass it. But to see them, you must stop reading the Book of the Dead as superstition and start reading it as science, as spiritual technology, a metaphysical map of inner states. So the question is not, what happens when I die? The question is, am I fully alive right now or already forgetting? If this part helped you realize that ancient texts may hold deeper truths for the present moment, comment, I read the Book of the Living. Because this isn't just about where you go after death, it's about where you are while alive. The moment the soul steps beyond the veil, it does not vanish into myth, it awakens into memory. This is what the Book of the Dead reveals. You were never just reading it, you were remembering it. Each spell, each line of sacred text was not instruction for another being. It was a mirror, a reflection of the terrain your soul already knows, but your waking mind has forgotten. The book is not a script for the afterlife. It's a code for navigating consciousness. In its pages, the soul journeys past trials, not punishments but reflections. The crocodile-headed demons, your untamed instincts. The fires you walk through, your repressed fears. The weighing of the heart, the measure of your truth. And in each phase, a choice, to cling to illusion or to surrender into clarity. This is why the Egyptians wrote the book on tomb walls, on papyrus scrolls, on sarcophagi. Not to teach the dead, but to anchor memory. Because they believe memory is not in the brain, it's in the field. And when a soul sees the symbols again, it reawakens. That's why the images seem familiar. That's why the prayers echo like forgotten songs. Because deep down, you've walked this path before. And maybe the reason you're drawn to this knowledge now is because some part of you is already walking it again. If this part made something stir in your memory, something ancient and unexplainable, comment, I remember the path. Because remembering is not recalling the past, it's returning to who you truly are. The most iconic scene in the Egyptian Book of the Dead is not one of fire or monsters, it is one of balance, the weighing of the heart. In this ritual, the soul stands before the divine judge Ma'at, the embodiment of truth and cosmic harmony. Her feather is placed on one side of the scale, on the other, the heart of the deceased. No witnesses, no testimony, just vibration. Because in the Egyptian understanding, your heart is not a metaphor for emotion. It is a recorder of resonance. Every lie you told, every truth you silenced, every fear you swallowed, remains encoded in the frequency of your being. The heart was not judged for morality. It was judged for coherence. If it was heavier than the feather, laden with distortion, it was devoured by Amit, the soul eater. Not as punishment, as physics. Heaviness cannot rise. But if the heart was light, free of guilt, aligned with Ma'at, it passed through the gates into the higher realms. This is not a superstition. This is symbolic science. You are constantly weighing your own heart. Each night you sleep with your deeds. Each moment you vibrate with your integrity or your avoidance, and the field responds. What the Egyptians knew is what mystics still teach. The universe is not impressed by status, only by frequency. So the question is never, were you perfect? It is, were you honest? If this part made you feel the truth encoded in your own heart, comment, I walk in Ma'at, because your lightness is not a feeling, it is your freedom. Beyond the weighing of the heart, the Book of the Dead reveals another truth. The journey after death is not through places, but through states. Each gate the soul must pass is not guarded by demons. It is guarded by illusions. One gate demands the name of your own shadow. Another requires the confession of what you never became. A third shows you a mirror and asks if you recognize yourself. These are not fantasy challenges. They are metaphysical checkpoints, because in the Egyptian view, the afterlife is not a destination. It is an unveiling. You don't arrive there. You are stripped there, stripped of your roles, your masks, your status, until only essence remains. And the more you've identified with illusion in life, the harder the journey becomes. The soul that clings to power must pass through powerlessness. The soul that worships image must pass through formlessness. The soul that hid in distraction must pass through stillness, not as punishment, as purification. You cannot enter the realm of light carrying what is false. This is why the spells in the book are not charms. They are passwords. They work only when spoken from knowing. To speak your shadow's name, you must have faced it. To recognize the gate, you must have walked the inner landscape. Because this journey doesn't begin when you die. It begins when you awaken. And every lie you dissolve in life is one less gate to fear and death. If this part helped you feel how your inner work shapes your soul's path, comment, "I clear my gates while living," because the real judgment does not await you. It already lives in what you carry. The ancient Egyptians understood something most modern minds forget. Death is not the opposite of life. It is the mirror of life. And what reflects in that mirror depends on what you cast into it. In the Book of the Dead, one of the most mysterious concepts is the idea of the double, the Ka. The Ka is not your soul. It's your energetic twin, the force that animates you, the pattern of your being. At death, your Ka remains. It lingers in the world you've shaped, through your choices, your rituals, your presence. If you lived with coherence, your Ka is strong. It guides, it protects. But if you live divided, your Ka becomes fragmented, lost, confused. This is why the ancients emphasized ritual, not as religion, but as resonance. Every offering, every chant, every sacred gesture wasn't about gods. It was about aligning your Ka, so that when the body dropped, the double would be strong enough to guide the rest of you through the gates. Modern science might call this subtle energy, field dynamics, quantum imprint. But the ancients didn't need microscopes. They watched the world and saw its pattern. The lotus opens with the sun. The scarab pushes the sun across the sky. The soul follows its own echo. And if your echo is unclear, so is your afterlife. This is not fear-based mythology. It's spiritual physics. Because who you are in death is who you practice being in life. If this part helped you see your energy body as more than metaphor, comment, "I align my Ka daily," because your reflection in the next world is built in this one. The journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, is not a descent into horror. It's a decoding of self. In the Duat, you don't face monsters. You face metaphors, serpents of deception, lakes of fire for purification. Doors guarded by questions, not weapons. And the only way through is knowing the answers, not factual answers, embodied answers. Who are you? What do you carry? What do you fear? These are not tests of knowledge. They're tests of frequency, because in the afterlife, your vibration speaks louder than your words. This is why the Book of the Dead contains spells, hymns, names, because naming is claiming. To know the name of a gate is to pass through it. To speak the name of a god is to align with its force. But here's the truth. These gods are not distant beings. They are aspects of your consciousness. Anubis, the discerner of truth. Thoth, the keeper of memory. Isis, the frequency of rebirth. Ra, the eternal flame of clarity. You don't pray to them, you awaken them within. Because in the Duat, no one saves you, no one punishes you. You navigate by resonance. And when you reach the Hall of Mayat, where your heart is weighed against the feather of truth, you'll know. You cannot fake lightness. You either lived aligned with truth, or you carried the weight of distortion. If this part helped you feel the metaphysical truth behind the myth, comment, "I walk the Duat consciously," because in the journey beyond death, clarity is currency. The Hall of Mayat is not judgment, it is geometry, a sacred balance. Your heart is placed on one side of the scale. On the other, a single feather, not just any feather, the feather of Mayat, cosmic order, truth, and harmony. If your heart is heavier than the feather, it's not because you were bad. It's because you were out of resonance, out of alignment. Weighted with regrets, attachments, deceit. self-forgetting. You are not punished. You simply cannot pass through. Not yet. Because passing into the next dimension isn't about reward. It's about coherence. Only the light can move into light. And here's the deeper mystery. Your heart is not weighed by a god. It is weighed by itself. You are both witness and scale. You are the one who knows what you carried. The Book of the Dead teaches this with symbol, but also with instruction. How to speak truth, how to remember names, how to clear distortions before death. Because the goal isn't to avoid the weighing, it's to arrive to it empty. No burden, no mask, no false identity, only essence. And when your heart is light, you pass through the gate of fire. You are not erased, you are reassembled. This is the real resurrection, not in body, but in frequency. If this part helped you understand how judgment is resonance, not punishment. Comment, I align with the feather, because the scale isn't about sin, it's about symmetry. The final transformation is not an end, it is an unveiling. Once your heart is light enough to match the feather, you pass through the fire, not to be destroyed, but to be purified. The ancient texts call this becoming an ach, a luminous being, a radiant soul, no longer a shadow of identity, no longer a fragment of memory, but a presence so aligned, so coherent, it becomes immortal, not in time, but in truth. You become part of the eternal chorus, the light that guides others through their own darkness. You return to the stars, not as dust, but as design. And yet, this is not just a tale of death, it is the blueprint of life. The Egyptian Book of the Dead was never about the afterlife alone. It was a manual for living aligned, to speak only what uplifts, to act only from balance, to remember the divine pattern inside all things, because the real dead are not those who have passed. The real dead are those who walk the earth asleep, forgetting who they are, what they carry, and where they come from. But the moment you remember, you live again, fully, and the weighing begins not at death, but now. So ask yourself, what weighs your heart? What truth are you avoiding? What alignment is asking to return? Because when you live light, you die light. And when you die light, you rise. If this journey helped you see death not as an ending, but as a return, comment, I walk in light, feather-hearted. And don't forget to like, comment your reflection, and share this sacred knowledge, because hidden truth only stays hidden when we stop remembering.